Water was rising past my knees, freezing and thick with toxic mud, but it was the words my sister said before slamming her custom mahogany door that chilled me to the bone. "Walk home, Bellamy. You will ruin the rugs. My guests are too important for this." She did not know I paid for those rugs. She did not know I paid for the door she just slammed in my face. And she was about to find out exactly what walking away really cost. I stood there in the freezing rain, the wind howling around me like a wounded animal, staring at the brass numbers on her massive house. The storm of the decade was tearing through South Carolina, and my own family had just looked at my shivering, soaked body and decided that my presence was an unacceptable aesthetic flaw for their dinner party. I felt the icy water seeping into my boots, chilling my feet to the point of numbness, but a different kind of cold was settling into my chest. It was a cold that came from a lifetime of being pushed aside, of being the family afterthought. The water swirled around my calves, carrying broken branches and debris from the neighborhood, yet all I could focus on was the warm, golden light spilling from the windows of a house I secretly funded. To understand how I ended up freezing on my sister's doorstep while she sipped expensive wine inside, you have to understand the museum of pain I had been living in for my entire life. I am 34 years old now, the founder of Aegis Shield, a cybersecurity firm. But to my parents, Orson and Althea, I was just Bellamy, the disappointment who did not know how to smile for the camera, the awkward girl who preferred writing code in the basement over attending cotillion classes. The first exhibit in my museum of pain was my college graduation. I remember standing on the sprawling green lawn of the campus, holding my diploma in one hand and my phone in the other. Families were everywhere, hugging, cheering, taking endless photographs. The air was filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the sound of proud parents telling their children how much they loved them. I stood alone near the fountain. My parents had promised to be there. They had sworn they would make the drive. But the morning of the ceremony, my mother called. Merritt, my younger sister, who was 21 at the time, had a sudden, urgent cheerleading competition. She was the captain, you see. It was a very big deal. My mother's voice through the phone had been rushed and dismissive, carrying no trace of guilt. "Bellamy, you know how nervous Merritt gets," she had said, adjusting her tone to sound like she was the victim of a scheduling conflict rather than the architect of my heartbreak. "She needs her support system today. The scouts are watching. You are strong. You can walk across that stage by yourself, right? We are so proud of you, honey, we really are, but Merritt is just falling apart over here." I did walk by myself. I wore my rented gown, listened to the speeches about the bright future ahead, and felt entirely invisible. I took a picture with a professor who pitied me, went back to my empty dorm room, and ate a stale turkey sandwich while scrolling through my mother's Facebook feed. It was flooded with pictures of Merritt in her sparkling uniform, captioned, "Our golden girl shines again." There was no mention of my degree. The second exhibit came 3 years later, during the hardest period of my adult life. I had just started my first tech venture out of a tiny, drafty apartment on the bad side of town. The heating barely worked, and I was living on cheap ramen noodles and instant coffee, working 20 hours a day to build a firewall architecture that I believed would change the industry. The business was failing. I was drowning in debt, terrified I would end up on the streets. I swallowed my immense pride and called my parents to ask for a small loan, just enough to keep the electricity on for 1 more month. I practiced the speech in the mirror for an hour, promising to pay them back with interest. My father answered the phone. Before I could even finish explaining my desperate situation, he sighed loudly into the receiver, a sound of profound exhaustion meant to make me feel small. "Bellamy, you know we are on a tight budget right now," he said gruffly. "We cannot keep bailing you out of these little computer hobbies. You need to get a real job, maybe something in administration. We just do not have the liquid cash to throw at a failing project." A tight budget. I accepted his answer, hung up, and prepared to sell my only laptop. Yet, 2 days later, my mother called me, not to ask if I had eaten, not to check if my power was still on, but to ask if I could spare $2,000. Merritt was getting married to Vaughn, and she simply had to have a specific designer wedding dress that was slightly out of their budget. "It is her special day, Bellamy," my mother argued, her voice dripping with emotional manipulation. "You cannot be selfish when it comes to family. This is Merritt's moment to shine." I hung up the phone, stared at my empty bank account, and cried until I threw up. I promised myself right then that I would never ask them for anything ever again, and that I would succeed just to prove them wrong. The third exhibit was more recent, but it stung just as deeply because it proved that time and money changed nothing. It was Thanksgiving last year. I had driven to their house in my old, reliable Jeep. I love that car. It got me through my toughest years, never breaking down when I needed it most. I parked it in the driveway next to Vaughn's least luxury sedan. As I walked up to the house, carrying a homemade pie, I heard my father talking to my uncle on the porch. "Look at that piece of garbage she drives," Orson laughed, shaking his head and pointing a beer bottle at my car. 33 years old, and she still lives like a struggling college student. I do not know where we went wrong with her. Look at Merritt, building a real life, running an events business, networking with the right people. Bellamy just hides behind a screen all day. She lacks ambition. I froze behind the hedge, listening to my own father degrade me to our extended family. He was embarrassed by me. They were all embarrassed by me because I did not wear designer labels and I did not post curated vacation photos on social media. Standing in the floodwaters outside Merritt's mansion, the memories washed over me, heavier than the rain. The icy water lapped at my knees, but the fire of resentment burned brightly in my chest. I looked at the muddy water swirling around my legs and clenched my freezing fists. I was shivering violently, my teeth chattering so hard my jaw ached. Why? Why did I let them treat me this way? And more importantly, why the hell was I paying $15,000 a month for the privilege of being their scapegoat? Has your family ever treated you like an embarrassment? Let me know in the comments while you hit that like button, because what happens next changed everything. My sister Merritt is an event planner. She runs a boutique firm called Luxury Event Planning, catering to the wealthy elite of South Carolina. Her entire life is a carefully constructed illusion, built for social media validation and high society approval. She and her husband Vaughn live in a stunning lakefront mansion, drive luxury European cars that cost more than most people make in a decade, and take exotic vacations to islands with unpronounceable names. My parents, Orson and Althea, worship the ground Merritt walks on. To them, she is the ultimate success story, the daughter who elevated the family name and secured their place among the local aristocracy. There is just one massive, undeniable flaw in their perfect picture. None of it is real. Merritt's business barely breaks even. She spends more on marketing her own image than she makes from actual clients. Vaughn is a mid-level manager at a logistics firm who spends more on custom golf clubs and rare bourbons than he brings home in a month. So how do they afford a life that costs upwards of $20,000 a month to maintain? How do my parents afford their country club memberships and European cruises on a modest retirement income? The answer is the grandfather trust. 5 years ago, after my first successful software exit, I made a decision that I now deeply regret. I wanted to help my family, despite everything they had put me through. I thought that if the financial stress was gone, maybe they would finally relax. Maybe they would finally have the emotional capacity to love me. I remembered a promise I made to my grandmother on her deathbed, swearing I would always make sure the family was taken care of. But I knew my parents. I knew my sister. If I handed them money directly, they would either reject it out of stubborn pride or, more likely, resent me for being the provider. They could never accept being subordinate to the daughter they deemed a failure. So, I went to my lawyer, Mr. Thayer, a brilliant man who specializes in wealth management and corporate structuring. I asked him to set up a blind trust. We crafted a beautiful, elaborate lie. We told the family that my late grandfather, a man who allegedly invested in a small Texas oil well decades ago, had left behind a hidden asset that had finally matured and been discovered by his estate. Thayer played his part flawlessly, delivering the news in a sharp suit in his downtown office, sliding crisp documents across a mahogany desk. From that day forward, Exactly $15,000 was deposited into a joint account managed by Orson, Althea, and Merritt on the 15th of every month. I funded it entirely from my own earnings, filtering it through dummy corporations to keep my name entirely off the ledger. Over 5 years, I had quietly transferred $900,000 to my family. Instead of bringing us together, the money amplified their worst traits. They became arrogant, entitled, and obsessed with status. And somehow, their disdain for me grew even stronger. Because in their eyes, I was still just the plain, boring daughter working a blue-collar computer job while they were living the high life on grandfather's mysterious fortune. A perfect example of this dynamic happened just 2 weeks before the storm. We were having a rare Sunday family lunch at a high-end bistro in Charleston. I arrived straight from a server maintenance emergency, wearing my usual work attire, a durable utility jacket, a plain gray sweater, and dark cargo pants. I was comfortable and clean, but I clearly did not belong in the sea of pastel linen, pearls, and designer sunglasses that populated the restaurant. I sat down at the table, and Merritt immediately let out a dramatic sigh, rolling her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in the back of her head. She placed her brand-new, ridiculously expensive Hermes bag on the empty chair next to her, patting the leather as if it were a fragile newborn baby. "Bellamy, really?" Merritt said, looking me up and down with open disgust, her voice carrying over the soft jazz playing in the background. "We're at the Palmetto Room. Could you not have found something decent to wear? You look like you just finished a shift at a hardware store. It is humiliating." Vaughn snickered, slicing into his prime rib. "Come on, Merritt, give her a break. Maybe the thrift store was closed today. Or maybe she spent her whole paycheck on a new keyboard." I looked at my mother, waiting for her to intervene, to defend me just once. Althea just adjusted her silk scarf, took a sip of her mimosa, and frowned at me. "Your sister has a point, Bellamy. It is about presenting a certain image. Merritt works very hard to cultivate connections in this town. When you show up looking so unkempt, it reflects poorly on all of us. People judge us based on the company we keep." "I was dealing with a network security breach," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. "My clients do not care what I wear as long as their data is safe." My father waved his hand dismissively, flagging down a waiter for another expensive bottle of wine. Yes, your little computer projects. We know. But you should try to learn from your sister. Look at how she handles herself. The trust fund has been a blessing, yes, but Merritt knows how to leverage it to build real wealth and social equity." I almost laughed out loud. "Build real wealth?" "She spent $3,000 on that handbag sitting next to her. She spent $1,500 on our mother's elaborate skincare routine last month. She paid off $4,000 of our father's credit card debt because he bought a boat he could not afford to maintain. I knew every single transaction because Thayer sent me the detailed statements every 30 days. They were burning through my money, insulting me while they did it, and praising a dead grandfather for my hard work." I sat through the rest of the lunch in silence, biting my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I looked at Merritt, laughing loudly at one of Vaughn's mediocre jokes, her designer jewelry catching the sunlight. I thought about the Aegis Shield valuation report sitting on my desk at home. My company had just been valued at $20 million. I could buy this entire restaurant and fire the staff just for looking at me wrong, but I sat there, letting my family treat me like the dirt on their expensive shoes. I smiled softly, paying for my own iced tea while Vaughn charged their $200 meal to the family account. I told myself to be patient. I told myself that they were still my family. But the storm was coming, and it was going to wash away every illusion they had left. Will they survive when the truth comes out? Keep watching. The weather report started sounding the alarm on a Tuesday. By Thursday, it was upgraded to a Category 3 storm warning with a severe risk of localized flooding. Living near the coast in South Carolina, we were used to heavy rain and the occasional hurricane scare, but the meteorologists were using words like unprecedented, catastrophic, and life-threatening. I spent most of Thursday fortifying my small, practical house. It was a sturdy, older build, but I was not taking any chances. I moved my critical servers to the second floor, checked the backup generators, double-checked my firewall integrity in case of localized power grid failures, and stocked up on bottled water and canned goods. My phone buzzed constantly throughout the day, not with worried messages from my parents or my sister asking if I was safe, but with updates from my dedicated team at Aegis. Merritt, on the other hand, was facing a crisis of a very different nature. That weekend, despite the looming severe weather warnings, she was scheduled to host the most important dinner party of her life. Evander and Hollis, the owners of a massive, globally recognized luxury resort chain, were coming to her house. Merritt had been aggressively trying to land the exclusive event planning contract for their resorts for 2 years. If she secured this deal, her business would finally be legitimate, generating actual revenue instead of just functioning as a massive money pit funded by my secret monthly deposits. On Friday afternoon, the sky turned a bruised, violent purple. The wind started tearing branches off the old oak trees in my yard, throwing them against the siding of my house with loud, frightening thuds. My phone rang. The caller ID flashed with the name Jovi. Jovi is our older cousin, the family's resident gossip, and Merritt's most loyal, sycophantic flying monkey. "Hey, Bellamy," Jovi's voice crackled through the phone, sounding strained and overly sweet over the sound of the wind outside. "Just calling to make sure you are staying put tonight." "I am fine, Jovi. I have supplies. Are you guys safe in the city?" I asked, looking out my window as the rain began to fall in heavy, horizontal sheets, obscuring the houses across the street. "We are fine. Look, I am actually calling on behalf of Merritt," Jovi said, quickly dropping the fake pleasantries. "She is in an absolute panic about the dinner tonight. Evander and Hollis are still coming. Their private driver has a massive reinforced SUV, so a little rain will not stop them. Merritt just wanted me to remind you to, stay away from the lake house tonight." I frowned, my grip on the phone tightening. "Why would I drive to the lake house in a hurricane, Jovi? That makes zero sense." "Well, you know how you get. Always popping up unannounced," Jovi lied smoothly. I had not visited Merritt unannounced in 5 years. Merritt just cannot afford any distractions tonight. These clients are billionaires, Bellamy. They operate in high society. They are not used to smelling manual labor or dealing with awkward family members. Merritt needs everything perfect, and your whole aesthetic is just a bit too blue-collar for this crowd. You understand, right? We just do not want you ruining her big break." My jaw clenched so hard my teeth ached. "Tell Merritt not to worry. I will not ruin her aesthetic." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto my sofa, taking a deep breath to calm the rising anger. The sheer audacity of them to call me just to insult me during a natural disaster was staggering. An hour later, my laptop chimed with an urgent message from Declan, my brilliant, slightly neurotic chief of staff at Aegis. "Declan, hey boss. Just got a massive gift basket delivered to the office before the couriers shut down for the storm. Gourmet cheeses, rare truffles, vintage wine, the works. It is from Evander's team." I smiled. 2 weeks ago, Evander's resort chain had suffered a near-fatal data breach. Their internal security team had failed catastrophically, and they were days away from a public scandal that would have tanked their stock and destroyed their reputation. My team at Aegis stepped in, patched the critical vulnerabilities, secured the stolen data, and traced the hackers within 48 hours. Evander had personally signed a $5 million security contract with me just 3 days ago. "Bellamy, nice. Divided among the team if they are still at the office. Be safe out there, Declan." "Declan, will do." Oh, by the way, Evander's assistant mentioned he is staying in the area this weekend for some local dinner party. Rich people are crazy going out in this weather. Stay dry, boss. I stared at the screen, the irony washing over me in cold waves. Evander was Merritt's VIP guest. The man Merritt was desperately trying to impress, the man she was willing to banish her own sister for, was my newest, most grateful client. The irony was so sharp it almost physically hurt. I considered calling Merritt to warn her, to tell her exactly who she was hosting and how small the world truly was. But a loud, violent crack from my basement interrupted my thoughts. The lights flickered and died. A thick, acrid smell of burning rubber filled the house. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight and ran to the basement door. The water table had risen faster than anyone predicted. Muddy, freezing water was pouring through the basement window wells, quickly short-circuiting the main electrical panel. My ancient electric heater had blown up in a shower of sparks before dying completely. Within 30 minutes, the temperature inside my house dropped drastically. The storm outside was intensifying, pushing cold, freezing rain against the glass with terrifying force. The water in my basement was rising fast, creeping up the wooden stairs toward the main floor. I tried calling emergency services, but the lines were jammed with panic calls. I tried calling a local hotel, but the roads leading into town were already submerged. I was stuck. The water was breaching the ground floor, bringing the freezing cold with it. I had no heat, no power, and the water was getting higher. I needed higher ground. I needed shelter. Merritt's Lake House was built on an elevated ridge, about a mile away. It was a fortress, with a massive industrial backup generator. It was the only safe place I could reach on foot. I did not want to go, but survival instinct overrode my pride. I put on my thickest wool socks, my heavy waterproof boots, and my trusted utility jacket. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the raging storm. What would you do in my shoes? Keep listening to find out. The moment I stepped off my front porch, the wind hit me like a solid brick wall, nearly knocking me backward into the rising water. The rain was not falling, it was being fired at me horizontally, stinging my cheeks and exposed skin like tiny icy needles. It was barely 6 in the evening, but the sky was pitch black, illuminated only by the frantic, strobe-like flashes of lightning that ripped across the heavy clouds. The sound was deafening, a continuous, terrifying roar of wind tearing through the trees and water rushing over pavement. I waded into the street. The water was already up to my calves and moving with a terrifying, aggressive current. It was brown, thick with mud, and filled with unseen, dangerous debris. Branches, overturned trash cans, pieces of fencing, and unidentifiable objects bumped against my legs in the dark. Every single step was a physical battle against the rushing water and the screaming wind. The cold was immediate and brutal. Despite my heavy boots and thick wool socks, the freezing floodwater quickly seeped through the seams, turning my feet into heavy blocks of ice. My utility jacket, designed for heavy weather but not for wading through a localized tsunami, was soaked through within the first 10 minutes. I pulled the hood tight around my face, shining the flashlight ahead, trying desperately to stay in the exact center of the road to avoid the deeper, unseen ditches near the sidewalks. I had to walk 1 mile. Under normal, sunny circumstances, it was a pleasant 20-minute stroll through a quiet suburban neighborhood. Tonight, it felt like a death march across a hostile alien planet. About halfway there, the water level rose to my knees. The current was significantly stronger here, pulling at my legs, trying to drag me down into the muddy depths. I slipped on a submerged piece of broken asphalt and went down hard on one knee. The freezing water splashed up to my chest, stealing the breath from my lungs in a sharp, painful gasp. I scrambled back up, panic starting to claw at the edges of my rational mind. The cold was no longer just uncomfortable, it was becoming actively dangerous. I could feel my core temperature dropping with alarming speed. My fingers were stiff and clumsy, barely able to maintain a grip on the heavy flashlight. My jaw was locked, and I was shivering so violently I thought my teeth might crack under the pressure. Keep moving, I told myself, putting one heavy, waterlogged foot in front of the other. Just keep moving. They have a generator. They have a fire. They are your family. They will help you. I pushed through the searing pain in my joints, through the blinding rain that made it impossible to see more than 10 feet ahead, through the creeping, terrifying numbness in my limbs. I thought about the $15,000 a month. I thought about the $900,000 total. I thought about how much money I had quietly poured into making their lives comfortable, secure, and warm. Surely, despite our massive differences, despite their constant embarrassment of me, they would not turn me away in a state of literal emergency. I was their daughter. I was her sister. Blood had to mean something when the world was falling apart and your life was on the line. After what felt like grueling hours of fighting the current, the road finally began to incline. The water slowly receded from my knees down to my ankles as I marched up the paved private driveway leading to Merritt's sprawling estate. Through the dense curtain of rain, I saw it. The massive, three-story lake house stood like a beacon in the darkness. While the rest of the neighborhood was plunged into pitch blackness, Merritt's house was blazing with warm, inviting light. The heavy industrial generator hummed loudly over the sound of the wind, a mechanical heartbeat of wealth and security. I dragged my exhausted, freezing body up the stone steps to the expansive front porch. It was covered and shielded from the worst of the driving wind. I leaned against the cold brick wall for a moment, trying to catch my breath. My chest was heaving, my lungs burning with every intake of cold air. My clothes were plastered to my skin, dripping muddy water onto the pristine slate floor of the porch. I looked through the massive, floor-to-ceiling dining room windows. The scene inside was like something out of a luxury lifestyle magazine, a perfect tableau of extreme wealth. The long mahogany dining table was set with sparkling crystal glasses, polished silver cutlery, and elaborate floral centerpieces. A roaring fire crackled beautifully in the massive stone fireplace, casting a golden glow over the room. Merritt was there, wearing a stunning, backless silk gown that clung to her perfectly, looking like a movie star. She was laughing, holding a delicate glass of red wine, looking elegant and entirely at ease. Vaughn was standing near the fireplace, wearing a tailored suit, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to a distinguished-looking man with silver hair. Evander. I recognized him immediately from my countless video conferences. He was nodding politely, holding a glass of expensive scotch. Hollis, Evander's wife, sat elegantly on a plush velvet sofa, listening intently to my mother, Althea, who was wearing her expensive pearls and a polite, practiced, fake smile. My father, Orson, was pouring more wine for everyone, playing the perfect host. They looked so warm. They looked so incredibly safe. They looked like a perfect, flawless family living in an untouchable bubble. I looked down at myself. I was covered in dark mud, my hair plastered to my face in wet strings, shivering uncontrollably, my lips turning a dangerous shade of blue. I looked exactly like the person they spent their entire lives trying to hide from the world. But I was freezing, my house was currently underwater, and I had nowhere else to go. I needed them. I walked over to the massive, custom-built wooden front door. I raised a numb, trembling fist, took a deep breath, and knocked heavily against the wood. The heavy thud of my knock echoed sharply, piercing through the noise of the storm outside. Inside the house, I saw the movement stop instantly. The laughter died in their throats. Merritt's head snapped toward the door, her flawless, practiced smile vanishing, replaced rapidly by a look of sheer panic and intense irritation. She whispered something quickly to Vaughn, who frowned deeply and set his drink down. My father set down the expensive wine bottle he was holding, his face darkening with annoyance. I waited, my teeth chattering loud enough for me to hear over the howling wind. I saw shadows moving in the brightly lit foyer through the frosted glass side panels. The heavy deadbolt clicked, and the door opened, but only about 2 inches. Merritt's face appeared in the narrow gap, her eyes wide. The warm air from inside spilled out onto the porch, smelling of roasted garlic, expensive floral perfume, and burning cedar wood. It was intoxicating. I instinctively leaned toward the warmth, my body aching for relief from the freezing cold. When Merritt's eyes adjusted to the dark and she saw me standing there, dripping mud and dirty rainwater onto her pristine porch, her expression twisted into a mask of absolute horror and disgust. "Bellamy," she hissed, keeping her voice low so it would not carry back to the dining room where her billionaires were sitting. "What the hell are you doing here?" "My house is flooding," I managed to say, my voice trembling violently, barely louder than a whisper. "The power is out." The main heater exploded. "The water is knee-deep in the streets. I need to come in, Merritt. I am freezing to death." My father's face appeared in the gap behind Merritt. He looked at me, taking in my soaked, Ruined utility jacket, my muddy boots, the absolute mess of my appearance. There was no concern in his eyes. There was no fatherly worry. There was only deep, profound disgust. Are you insane? Merritt whispered furiously, pushing the door a fraction of an inch closer to closing, physically blocking the warmth. You cannot come in here. Look at you. You are covered in toxic mud and filth. You will ruin the $30,000 Persian rugs. My guests are in the dining room, Bellamy. Evander and Hollis are right there. I am trying to close the biggest deal of my career. Merritt, I am suffering from hypothermia, I pleaded, resting my freezing, shaking hand on the edge of the door, desperate to keep it open. I just walked a mile in freezing floodwater. I just need to sit by the fire. I will stay in the kitchen. I will hide in the laundry room. I will not even speak to them. Please. No, Orson said, his voice hard, cold, and entirely devoid of empathy. You should have checked the weather reports, Bellamy. You always do this. You always show up looking like a disaster, expecting us to accommodate your poor life choices. Merritt is trying to secure a massive contract tonight. This is her future. We are not going to let you drag your swamp mess in here and ruin her image in front of the people who matter. I stared at my father, disbelief temporarily overriding the freezing cold in my veins. Dad, it is an emergency. I am your daughter. I have nowhere else to go. The water is rising. My mother, Althea, stepped into the foyer. She hovered behind my father, wringing her manicured hands, her pearl necklace catching the light. Bellamy, please, Althea said, her voice laced with heavy annoyance rather than maternal worry. Do not be difficult. You are going to ruin this business deal for your sister. You know how important this is for her brand. Just go find a motel. Or a public shelter. You are tough. You always survive. You will figure it out. The roads are closed, Mom, I said, my voice cracking, tears of sheer frustration mixing with the rain on my face. The water is too high. Cars cannot get through. I have to stay here tonight. I am not letting you in, Merritt said, her voice dropping to a vicious, cruel whisper that cut deeper than the wind. You are not going to embarrass me tonight. You are not going to humiliate me in front of billionaires by parading around looking like a homeless person. I told Jovi to tell you to stay away. Why can you never just follow instructions? Merritt, I am begging you, I said, my knees shaking so badly I thought I might collapse right there on the slate floor. I am so cold. I cannot feel my feet. Then walk faster, Merritt spat, her eyes narrowing with pure malice. Walk home, Bellamy. Deal with it yourself. She looked me dead in the eye, and without a single ounce of hesitation, she slammed the heavy mahogany door shut. The loud click of the deadbolt sliding into place sounded louder than the thunder crashing overhead. I stood there for a long time. The wind whipped my wet hair across my face, stinging my eyes. I stared at the solid wood of the door, the physical barrier between me and the family I had spent 5 years supporting. I looked through the side window one last time. I saw Merritt turning back toward the dining room, instantly plastering that fake, radiant, welcoming smile back onto her face as if nothing had happened. She walked back to Evander and poured him more wine, laughing brightly at something he said. Orson and Althea followed her, looking visibly relieved. Relieved that they had successfully protected their high society aesthetic from their own flesh and blood. I did not knock again. I did not scream. I did not cry anymore. The freezing cold in my body was suddenly matched by a profound, terrifying freezing of my heart. Every excuse I had ever made for them evaporated in that instant. Every justification, every desperate hope that they would eventually love me, every shred of familial duty I felt, it all died right there on that porch. They had looked at me, shivering and desperate, and they had chosen their fake luxury over my safety. They chose the appearance of wealth over my actual life. They told me to deal with it myself. I slowly turned away from the door and walked back down the stone steps into the raging storm. The water felt just as cold, the wind just as brutal, but I did not feel the pain the same way anymore. A burning, quiet fury had ignited in the center of my chest, pumping hot adrenaline through my freezing veins. I am going to deal with it myself, I thought, stepping back into the knee-deep water, leaning into the wind. And they're going to learn exactly what dealing with it means when my money is no longer shielding them from the harsh realities of the real world. I walked another half-mile in the opposite direction. I knew there was a county recreation center built on high ground that usually served as an emergency shelter during severe weather events. My legs moved mechanically, powered by nothing but pure, unadulterated anger and a primal will to survive. By the time I reached the concrete steps of the recreation center, my vision was blurring at the edges, and I could no longer feel my fingers, toes, or face. The shelter was packed with displaced families, shivering under gray wool blankets, huddled together for warmth. A volunteer county nurse took one look at me stumbling through the double doors and rushed me into a small, brightly lit triage room. She quickly stripped off my ruined utility jacket and wrapped me tightly in 3 thick thermal blankets, forcing me to drink a cup of hot, sugary tea. "Your core temperature is dangerously low, honey," the nurse said, checking my vitals with a deep frown of concern. "Mild hypothermia. If you had been out there for another 20 minutes, your organs would have started shutting down. What were you doing out in this weather? Did your car break down?" "I was visiting family," I said softly, staring blankly at the beige wall of the triage room. "They did not have room for me." The nurse paused, looking at me with deep, genuine pity. "Well, you are safe now. I need to document this for the county health records. Can I get your name?" "Bellamy. Bellamy Russell," I said. I made sure she wrote down the exact medical diagnosis. I wanted a paper trail. I wanted undeniable, documented proof of what they had left me out in the storm to endure. I sat on a hard plastic cot in the corner of the gymnasium for 3 hours, shivering violently as my body slowly warmed up. The noise of the shelter, crying children, murmuring anxious voices, the static crackle of a weather radio, faded into the background. My mind was remarkably clear. For 5 years, I had been living in a self-imposed prison of hope. I hoped my money would fix them. I hoped my massive financial sacrifice would buy their affection. Instead, it had bought a $30,000 rug that was considered more valuable than my life. At midnight, the storm finally began to break. The heavy rain slowed to a light drizzle, and the cell service, which had been spotty all evening, finally stabilized. I pulled my phone from the waterproof pocket of my ruined pants. Miraculously, it still had half its battery. I scrolled past the local weather alerts and found the contact for Mr. Thayer. I knew it was the middle of the night, but this could not wait until morning. The fire inside me demanded immediate action. I hit call. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice thick and raspy with sleep. "Bellamy? Are you all right? The local news says your area is entirely underwater." "I am fine, Mr. Thayer." "I am at a county shelter," I said, my voice steady, devoid of any weakness or emotion. "I apologize for waking you at this hour, but I need you to execute a legal directive immediately." "Right now?" "Bellamy, it is midnight on a Friday." "Right now," I insisted, gripping the phone tightly. "I need you to terminate the grandfather trust. Revoke all access, freeze the joint accounts, and halt the monthly transfers. The 15th is next Tuesday. I do not want a single cent moving into Merritt, Orson, or Althea's possession ever again." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I heard the rustle of sheets as Thayer sat up in his bed. He had warned me 5 years ago that this arrangement was a terrible idea. He had told me that giving money secretly rarely resulted in gratitude and usually resulted in entitlement. "Are you sure about this, Bellamy?" Thayer asked quietly, his lawyer instincts kicking in. "Once I send the termination notices, there is no walking this back. The illusion will be broken permanently. They will know the money came from you, and they will know it is gone." "I am entirely sure," I said, looking down at my hands, still red and swollen from the cold. "Draft the letters. Send them by registered courier first thing Monday morning. I want it in writing. I want them to know the well is dry. They told me to deal with my own problems tonight. It is time they deal with theirs." "Consider it done," Thayer said, a hint of professional satisfaction in his voice. "I will have the documents finalized by morning." I ended the call. A profound sense of relief washed over me, warmer and more comforting than the thermal blankets wrapped around my shoulders. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free of them. The heavy, suffocating anchor I had been dragging behind me for 34 years had finally been cut loose. They thought they had won tonight. They thought they had successfully protected their fragile, expensive social standing by locking the ugly, embarrassing daughter out in the cold. But they had no idea that the storm outside was nothing compared to the financial hurricane that was about to hit their perfect, curated lives. Thank you so much for watching the story so far. If you want to hear exactly how my family reacts when the money dries up and the truth is exposed, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell me your thoughts in the comments. A week passed. The floodwaters finally receded, leaving behind a thick layer of foul-smelling mud across the lower elevations of our town. The storm was gone, but the wreckage remained. My own house had suffered significant water damage in the basement, requiring me to hire a disaster cleanup crew. The electricity was restored, my servers were running flawlessly, and my business at Aegis Shield was thriving more than ever. But personally, I felt like a hollow shell. I had not heard a single word from my parents or my sister since the night they locked me out in the freezing rain. They had not called to see if I survived. They had not texted to ask if my house was ruined. Their silence was the final, undeniable confirmation of my worth in their eyes. Then, on a sunny Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Merritt. I stared at her name on the screen for a long time, letting it ring until it almost went to voicemail, before finally pressing accept. Bellamy. Merritt's voice chirped through the speaker, sounding terrifyingly bright and entirely normal, as if she had not condemned me to a potential death out in the cold just 7 days prior. How are you holding up? I know the storm got pretty crazy on your side of town. I survived, Merritt, I said, my voice flat and devoid of any warmth. What do you want? Oh, stop being so grumpy, she laughed, a forced, brittle sound. Listen, Mom and Dad and I were talking, and we feel terrible about how things went down last Friday. It was just a misunderstanding, really. The stress of the dinner party, the storm, everyone was just on edge. We want to make it up to you. I am hosting a small, intimate dinner this Saturday. Just family and Evander and Hollis. They actually requested to meet you. I narrowed my eyes, staring at my computer screen. Evander and Hollis requested to meet me? Why? Well, you know how small this town is, Merritt said, her voice dropping slightly, losing some of its fake cheer. People talk. Apparently, some of the neighbors saw you walking in the storm, and a rumor started going around that we had some sort of family fight. Evander is very big on family values. He actually mentioned it to Vaughn on the golf course yesterday. He said he hoped everything was okay with my sister. So, we need to show him that we are a tight, loving unit. It will be fun. Please, Bellamy. Just come, eat some good food, and let us put this behind us. The sheer manipulation of it was breathtaking. She did not feel terrible about leaving me in the storm. She felt terrible that her billionaire clients might think she was a bad person, which could jeopardize her precious contract. She needed me to play the role of the happy, forgiven sister to save her brand. She needed me to be her prop. What time? I asked, a cold, calculated plan already forming in my mind. 7 o'clock, she said, clearly relieved that I was being so compliant. And Bellamy? Please, just for me, wear something nice. A dress? We really need to present a united, polished front. I will wear what I always wear, Merritt, I said, and hung up. Saturday evening arrived. The air was crisp and cool. I drove my old Jeep up the long, sweeping driveway of Merritt's lake house. The mud from the storm had been entirely washed away by expensive landscaping crews. Everything looked perfect again. I parked my Jeep right next to Evander's massive, custom luxury SUV. I stepped out, wearing my most comfortable pair of dark cargo pants, a pristine but utilitarian gray sweater, and my heavy boots. In my right hand, I carried a worn, brown leather briefcase containing a thick stack of documents they had prepared for me. Merritt answered the door before I could even knock. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve, and practically dragged me into the house, pulling me straight into the kitchen before anyone in the living room could see me. What are you wearing? She hissed, her eyes scanning my outfit with profound horror. I told you to wear a dress. You look like a contractor. I am a contractor, Merritt. I build digital walls, I replied calmly, pulling my arm out of her grip. Whatever. Listen to me very carefully, Merritt ordered, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. Evander and Hollis are very traditional. They want to see that we love each other. All you have to do is smile, agree with what I say, and act like last Friday was just a silly miscommunication. Do not talk about your boring computer job. Do not talk about money. Do not talk about the flood. You are just my quiet, slightly eccentric older sister who does data entry from home. Understand? I looked at my sister. I looked at the desperation in her eyes, the sheer terror that her fragile illusion of wealth and status might crack. I thought about the $15,000 she had just received on Tuesday, money she believed came from a dead man. I understand perfectly, Merritt, I said, offering her a tight, polite smile. Let us go meet your guests. I walked past her, my boots clicking firmly against the hardwood floor, and pushed open the swinging door that led into the sprawling, firelit living room. It was time to tear the illusion down. The living room was a masterclass in performative wealth. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting a warm, flattering light on my parents, who were seated on a velvet love seat, nursing crystal glasses of bourbon. Vaughn stood near the custom bar, mixing a cocktail for Hollis, who was dressed in elegant, understated cashmere. Evander stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, admiring the view of the moonlit lake. When the kitchen door swung shut behind me, all conversation stopped. My parents stiffened immediately. My mother, Althea, offered a strained, fearful smile, her eyes darting to my cargo pants and then quickly to Evander, praying he would not judge them for my appearance. Merritt hurried in right behind me, laughing nervously. She stepped in front of me, taking control of the narrative before I could even open my mouth. Evander, Hollis, I am so glad you could finally meet my sister, Merritt said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She waved a hand in my direction, treating me like a mildly embarrassing pet. This is Bellamy. As I mentioned, she is a bit of a homebody. She does some freelance data entry work on her computer, so she rarely gets out to socialize. But we are just so close, I simply had to have her here tonight so you could see the whole family together. I stood tall, holding my leather briefcase by my side. I did not look at the floor. I did not slouch. I looked directly at the back of Evander's silver hair. Evander turned around slowly, a polite smile forming on his face, ready to greet the data entry clerk. But the moment his eyes landed on me, the polite smile vanished. His jaw literally dropped. He blinked once, twice, as if trying to clear a hallucination from his vision. He looked at my face, then down at my practical gray sweater, then back up to my eyes. The crystal glass of expensive scotch in his hand tilted dangerously, nearly spilling onto Merritt's precious rug. Bellamy, Evander said, his voice loud and booming in the quiet room. My parents exchanged a look of pure confusion. Merritt's fake smile faltered. Oh, do you know someone named Bellamy, Evander? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Evander ignored her entirely. He practically shoved his way past Vaughn, striding across the living room with long, urgent steps. He stopped right in front of me, his face breaking into an expression of profound, overwhelming respect and relief. He reached out and grabbed both of my hands, shaking them vigorously. Good God, it is you. Bellamy Russell, Evander said, beaming. What on earth are you doing here? I thought you were based out of an office downtown. I live a few miles away, Evander, I said, allowing a genuine smile to touch my lips. It is good to see you in person. The video calls do not do you justice. And you as well. Evander laughed heartily. He turned to look at Merritt, who was staring at us with her mouth hanging open in sheer shock. Merritt, you never told me your sister was Bellamy Russell. Why did you not lead with that? Good heavens, woman, you have royalty in your family. Royalty? My father, Orson, choked out from the love seat, nearly spilling his bourbon. Evander, I think there has been a mistake. Bellamy just fixes computers. Evander turned to my father, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. Fixes computers? Orson, what are you talking about? Your daughter is the founder and chief architect of Aegis Shield. Evander looked back at Merritt, his expression hardening. Data entry? Are you out of your mind, Merritt? Bellamy here is one of the most brilliant cybersecurity minds on the East Coast. 2 weeks ago, my entire resort empire was under a coordinated cyber attack. We were bleeding data. We were days away from a multi-million-dollar scandal and a potential bankruptcy. Bellamy and her team stepped in, built a fortress around our servers in 48 hours, and saved my entire company. I just signed a $5 million contract with her firm. She is our savior. The silence in the room was deafening. It was a thick, heavy silence, the kind that follows a bomb detonation. I watched the color drain entirely from Merritt's face. She looked like she was going to faint. She looked at me, then at Evander, her mind struggling to process a reality that fundamentally shattered her entire worldview. The sister she had mocked, the sister she had hidden away, the sister she deemed too poor and ugly to associate with, was standing in her living room being praised by a billionaire as a peer. $5 million? Vaughn whispered from the bar, his eyes wide and unblinking. That is just the retainer, Evander said proudly, clapping me on the shoulder. He looked at my outfit, nodding with approval. And I love that you do not care about the flash, Bellamy. All substance. That is what I look for in a partner. No nonsense. Hollis, who had been sitting quietly on the sofa, slowly stood up. She walked over to her husband, her sharp eyes studying my face, then my clothes, and finally my boots. Hollis was a fiercely intelligent woman who missed nothing. Bellamy, Hollis said softly, her voice cutting through the tension. Evander mentioned that your home was in the area that flooded last Friday. The night of the terrible storm. Yes, ma'am. The water took out my basement and my power grid, I replied evenly. Hollis narrowed her eyes, looking slowly at Merritt, who was physically shrinking back against the kitchen door. Merritt was hosting us for dinner that night, as you know, Hollis continued, her voice growing colder by the second. Right before we sat down to eat, someone knocked on the door. Merritt told us it was just a confused, wandering homeless person. She said she sent them to a shelter because she did not want them tracking mud into her house. Hollis turned her piercing gaze back to me. Was that you, Bellamy? Were you the one standing out in the freezing rain? I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. I looked at my sister, whose eyes were wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. They were silently begging me to lie. They were begging me to protect their image, just like they had demanded my entire life. I set my leather briefcase on the expensive coffee table and unclasped the brass locks. Yes, Hollis, I said clearly, my voice ringing out in the silent room. That was me. My family locked me out in the storm. Bellamy, stop. Merritt shrieked, her voice cracking with panic. She lunged forward, trying to grab my arm, but Evander smoothly stepped between us, holding up a firm hand to stop her. Let her speak, Merritt, Evander commanded, his tone transforming from friendly guest to ruthless CEO in a fraction of a second. He looked at me, his eyes full of concern and growing anger. They locked you out? During a Category 3 storm? Why on earth would they do that to their own family? Because, I said, opening my briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of printed bank statements, I was wearing these exact clothes. And they told me that my appearance would embarrass them in front of you. They told me that my life was less important than a $30,000 rug and a potential business contract. That is a lie, Orson shouted, standing up from the love seat, his face flushed red with rage and embarrassment. Evander, do not listen to her. Bellamy has always been jealous of Merritt. She is unstable. We told her to go to a hotel because we did not have room. The roads were submerged. Dad, I said, turning to face him, feeling nothing but cold pity for the man. I told you I had hypothermia. I begged you just to let me sit in the laundry room by the dryer. And you told me to deal with it myself. So, I am dealing with it. I dropped the thick stack of bank statements onto the coffee table. The heavy thud made everyone flinch. What is this? Hollis asked, stepping closer to look at the papers. These are the financial records for the Grandfather Trust, I said calmly. My mother, Althea, gasped. Bellamy. How dare you bring family finances into this? That is grandfather's money. It has nothing to do with you. Grandfather died broke, Mom, I said, shattering the lie with a single sentence. He never invested in Texas oil. He never left us a dime. There is no grandfather trust. Vaughn walked slowly from the bar, staring at the papers. What are you talking about? The bank sends us a statement every month. $15,000. Every single month for 5 years. I know, I replied, looking directly into Vaughn's stunned eyes. Because I am the one sending it. I set up the blind trust through my lawyer, Mr. Thayer. Every single penny you have spent over the last 5 years came directly from my personal bank account. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. No, Merritt screamed, her hands flying to her head. No, you are lying. You are just trying to ruin my life. You do not have that kind of money. Merritt, Evander just told you I signed a $5 million contract 3 days ago, I said, my voice deadpan. I have more money than you could spend in 3 lifetimes. I picked up the top statement and began reading aloud, my voice clear and unwavering. Let us look at last month's expenditures, shall we? You received $15,000 on the 15th. On the 18th, Merritt spent $3,000 at the Hermes boutique in Charleston. On the 22nd, my mother spent $1,500 at a luxury medical spa for a bespoke skincare treatment. And on the 20th, $4,000 was transferred to pay off my father's secret credit card debt for a boat he hides at the marina. Shut up. Shut up. Orson bellowed, lunging toward the table, but Vaughn grabbed his arm, holding him back. Vaughn looked sick to his stomach. He was a proud man, and realizing his entire lifestyle was funded by the sister-in-law he relentlessly mocked was destroying his ego in real time. You called my car a piece of garbage, Dad, I continued, staring my father down. You told the whole family I was a struggling failure. You let Merritt treat me like a disease. And all the while, you were literally eating food paid for by my labor. You were sleeping under a roof secured by my money. I turned to Merritt, who was now sobbing hysterically, her perfect makeup running down her face in dark streaks. You told me to walk home in a flood because I looked like a contractor, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You slammed the door in my face. So, I walked to a shelter. I nearly froze to death. And while I was shivering on a plastic cot, I made one phone call to Mr. Thayer. The trust is terminated. The accounts are frozen. The $15,000 you expect on Tuesday is never coming. You told me to deal with my life, Merritt. Now it is time you pay for yours. Evander stood in silence, his face a mask of cold fury. He looked at my parents, who were now shrinking into the sofa, defeated and terrified. He looked at Merritt, who was weeping on the floor. This is the most vile, disgusting display of human behavior I have ever witnessed, Evander said quietly, his voice laced with venom. He turned to his wife. Hollis, get your coat. Wait, Evander, please. Merritt choked out, crawling toward his shoes. The event contract. I have the proposals. We can still do business. This is just a family dispute. Evander looked down at her with utter contempt. Do business with you? Merritt, I would not let you plan a child's birthday party. You are a parasite. You happily drained your sister's bank account to buy designer handbags, and then you left her to die in a storm because her clothes were not expensive enough for your taste. You have no morals, no loyalty, and no soul. Our contract is officially canceled. If you ever contact my company again, I will have my legal team bury you. Evander turned to me, his expression softening slightly. Bellamy, I am deeply sorry you had to endure this. If you need anything, a place to stay, security, you call me directly. You are a brilliant woman. Do not let these leeches drag you down. Thank you, Evander. I am fine. I am finally free, I said. Hollis placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, gave me a sad, sympathetic smile, and followed her husband out the front door. The heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind them, leaving me alone in the room with the shattered remains of my family. I packed the bank statements back into my leather briefcase, snapped the brass lock shut, and walked out into the cool night air without saying another word. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. I woke up on Monday morning in my house, the hum of the disaster cleanup crews working in my basement serving as background noise. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and waited. I knew exactly what time the registered couriers from Mr. Thayer's office were scheduled to arrive at the lake house and my parents' home. At precisely 10:15 in the morning, my phone began to vibrate violently across the granite counter. The caller ID flashed with my father's name. I let it ring until it stopped. A minute later, it rang again. Then my mother called. Then Vaughn. I silenced the phone, opened my laptop, and began reviewing firewall codes for Aegis. I refused to let their panic disrupt my peace. By noon, my voicemail was full. I decided to listen to the messages while I ate my lunch. The first message was from Orson. His voice was a mixture of outrage and deep, trembling fear. "Bellamy, pick up the damn phone. We just got a letter from that snake lawyer of yours. He says the trust is dissolved. You cannot do this. That is family money. You have no right to touch your grandfather's legacy. I am calling the police if you do not fix this immediately." I chuckled softly. He was still clinging to the lie, unable to accept that the daughter he despised was the sole architect of his comfortable life. The second message was from Vaughn. He sounded entirely broken. "Bellamy, it is Vaughn. Merritt is having a massive panic attack in the bathroom. I just went through the real finances. Without that $15,000 this week, we cannot cover the mortgage. We cannot cover the car leases. We are $50,000 in debt on credit cards alone." Merritt said the event business was making profit, but she was lying. She was just using your money to cover the losses. "Please, Bellamy. I know we were awful to you, but we are going to lose the house. Call me back." I deleted the messages. I felt no guilt. They had built a house of cards on a foundation of my silent sacrifice, and they had chosen to set it on fire. I was simply watching it burn. When they realized I was not going to answer their calls, they resorted to the only weapon they felt they had left: public manipulation. On Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed with an alert from Jovi, the flying monkey cousin. She had tagged me in a massive, sprawling Facebook post written by Merritt. I opened the app and read the essay. It was a masterpiece of victimhood. Merritt had posted a photo of herself looking tearful and exhausted, sitting on her expensive sofa. The caption was a long, dramatic tale of woe. "I never thought my own flesh and blood could be so cruel," Merritt wrote. "My sister, Bellamy, has always harbored a deep, toxic jealousy toward me and my happiness. Last week, she orchestrated a massive, manipulative lie to steal our family inheritance. She humiliated me in front of critical clients, ruining my small business, and now she is trying to force my husband and me out of our home out of pure spite. My parents are devastated. Please keep us in your prayers as we navigate this vicious betrayal by someone we loved." Within an hour, the comments section was a war zone. Extended family members, distant aunts, and Jovi were piling on, calling me a monster, a greedy corporate villain, and a terrible daughter. My mother shared the post, adding a comment about how her heart was broken by my greed. I sat in my office, watching the notifications roll in. 5 years ago, this would have crushed me. I would have called them, crying, begging for forgiveness, transferring money to make the public shaming stop. But the cold water of the flood had washed away my need for their approval. I took a screenshot of Merritt's post and forwarded it to Aunt Cressida. Aunt Cressida was my mother's older sister. Unlike Althea, Cressida was a retired school teacher, a woman of fierce intellect and zero tolerance for nonsense. 3 years ago, when my father Orson needed emergency heart bypass surgery, he did not have the insurance to cover it. The hospital was demanding massive upfront payments. My parents had called everyone, crying poverty. Merritt, who was supposedly deeply concerned, had refused to cancel her luxury vacation to the Maldives, claiming the tickets were non-refundable. It was me who paid the hospital bill. I paid $85,000 out of pocket to save my father's life. I did it through Aunt Cressida, swearing her to secrecy because I knew Orson would refuse the money if he knew it came from the failure daughter. Cressida had kept the secret perfectly. Until today. I sent Cressida a single text message. "They locked me out in the hurricane last Friday, Aunt Cress. They told me to walk home and freeze. The trust fund was my money. All of it. You have my permission to release the hounds. Aunt Cressida replied less than a minute later. I have been waiting 3 years for this. Watch the screen, sweetie. 10 minutes later, Aunt Cressida entered the digital battlefield. She did not just comment on Merritt's post. She created her own massive public update, tagging every single family member, including Merritt, Orson, Althea, and Jovi. Cressida's post began with a simple, brutal sentence. It is time this family stops worshipping a liar and starts respecting the woman who kept you all alive. She proceeded to dismantle Merritt's narrative piece by piece. Cressida explained, in excruciating detail, the truth about the grandfather trust. She explained how Bellamy, the daughter they constantly belittled for her clothes and her career, had been secretly filtering $15,000 a month into their accounts for 5 long years. But Cressida did not stop there. She brought out the heavy artillery. She uploaded high-resolution photos of the hospital billing statements from 3 years ago. The documents clearly showed the $85,000 payment for Orson's heart surgery, explicitly showing the wire transfer originating from Bellamy's corporate account. While Merritt was drinking champagne in the Maldives and claiming she could not help, Cressida wrote, Bellamy drained her own savings to save her father's life. And how did they repay her? Last Friday, during the worst storm this county has seen in a decade, Bellamy's house flooded. She walked a mile in freezing water to seek shelter at Merritt's massive, Bellamy-funded mansion. And Merritt, with the blessing of Orson and Althea, locked the door in her face and told her to walk home because her wet clothes would embarrass some rich clients. Bellamy almost died of hypothermia in a county shelter. Cressida ended the post with a lethal closing statement. Bellamy did not steal an inheritance. She finally turned off the ATM. Merritt, Althea, Orson, you are parasites. Do not ever speak to me again. The shift in public opinion was violent and immediate. The same aunts and cousins who had been calling me a monster just 30 minutes prior were suddenly deleting their comments in a panic. The family group chats exploded. Jovi, who had been leading the charge against me, suddenly went entirely silent, likely terrified of being targeted next. Merritt frantically deleted her victim post, but it was too late. People had taken screenshots. The gossip spread through our social circles and into the local business community like wildfire. In a town that values reputation above all else, Merritt was exposed not just as a fraud, but as a callous, cruel sister who abused her family for aesthetic purposes. My phone finally stopped ringing. The aggressive demands for money turned into deafening silence. They were humiliated on a public stage, and there was absolutely no way they could spin the narrative to make themselves the victims anymore. The receipts were undeniable. I spent the rest of the week focusing entirely on Aegis Shield. Evander introduced me to 3 other massive corporate clients who desperately needed security overhauls. My business expanded rapidly, demanding my full attention and rewarding me with incredible success. For the first time in my adult life, I felt light. The crushing burden of trying to buy my family's love was gone. I was sleeping better, working better, and breathing easier. 2 weeks after the Facebook incident, I received a carefully worded email from Vaughn. It was not a demand or a threat. It was a plea for mercy. Bellamy, the email read. I am so profoundly sorry. I was blind, arrogant, and foolish. I let Merritt convince me that we deserved that lifestyle. I should have defended you at the door. I should have let you in. I am packing my bags today. I am filing for divorce. The bank is foreclosing on the lake house next month. Merritt is moving back in with your parents. I know you will never forgive me, and I do not expect you to. But I wanted you to know that you were right. We got exactly what we deserved. I read the email, closed the tab, and deleted it. I did not reply. Forgiveness is a gift, and I was entirely out of charity. 6 months passed. The seasons changed, the flood damage across the town was entirely repaired, and the universe delivered a heavy, relentless dose of karma to the people who had wronged me. The sprawling lakefront mansion that Merritt and Vaughn had lived in was seized by the bank after 3 missed mortgage payments. Vaughn moved to a small apartment in a different city, finalizing a bitter, highly contested divorce. Merritt, stripped of her designer bags, her luxury car, and her fake billionaire status, was forced to move back into the small guest bedroom of my parents' house. Her event planning business completely collapsed. No one in the high society circles wanted to hire a planner who was publicly known for being a fraudulent, cruel social climber. But the financial strain did not stop with Merritt. Without my $15,000 a month, Orson and Althea could no longer maintain their lifestyle. They had to cancel their country club memberships. They had to sell Orson's prize boat at a massive loss just to pay off the credit card debts they had accumulated. At 62 and 60 years old, my parents were forced to go back to work. Orson took a job managing inventory at a local hardware store, and Althea started working the reception desk at a dental clinic. The irony of them working the very blue-collar jobs they used to mock me for was not lost on me. I moved on. I bought a beautiful, secure penthouse downtown, closer to my corporate offices. I expanded Aegis Shield globally, and my team grew to over 200 brilliant employees. I was surrounded by people who respected me for my mind, my work ethic, and my character, not my ability to fund their vanity. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, exactly 6 months after the storm, the receptionist at my office buzzed my desk. "Ms. Russell," the receptionist said, sounding hesitant. "There is an older woman down here in the lobby. She says she is your mother. She does not have an appointment, but she is crying and refusing to leave." I sighed, looking at the city skyline through my office windows. "Send her up." 5 minutes later, Althea walked into my spacious, glass-walled office. She looked older, tired, and entirely stripped of her usual arrogant polish. She was wearing a plain, sensible coat, clutching a cheap handbag. She looked around the massive office, taking in the sleek furniture and the busy analysts working outside my door, and her eyes filled with fresh tears. She stood in front of my desk, wringing her hands, looking exactly like the terrified, desperate woman she was. "Bellamy," Althea whispered, her voice cracking. "Your office, it is beautiful. You have done so well." "I have, Mom. What do you want?" I asked, not offering her a seat. Althea sniffled, wiping her eyes. "We are drowning, Bellamy. Your father is working 50 hours a week on his feet. My back aches every day from sitting at that clinic. Merritt is depressed. She will not even leave her room. We are about to lose the house. The property taxes are due, and we just do not have the money. Please. I know we were wrong. I know we treated you terribly. But we are family. We need you to help us. Just a small loan. Just to get us through the year." I looked at my mother. I looked at the tears rolling down her cheeks, begging for the very financial lifeline she used to arrogantly claim was her birthright. I remembered standing on Merritt's porch, shivering violently, begging for a warm corner to survive the night. I remembered her voice telling me to find a motel. I leaned back in my leather chair, steepling my fingers, and looked her dead in the eye. "Family is not a bank account, Mom," I said, my voice perfectly calm, steady, and cold. "Family is supposed to be shelter in a storm. When I was in a literal storm, freezing to death, you told me I was an embarrassment. You chose a rug over my life. We made a mistake." Althea sobbed, stepping closer to the desk. "We were stressed. You have to forgive us." "I do forgive you," I said softly. "I do not carry any anger anymore. It is bad for my health. But forgiveness does not mean access. You spent 5 years draining my accounts while insulting my character. I bought you luxury and you gave me cruelty. The well is permanently dry." "Bellamy, please." "What are we supposed to do?" she cried, her hands shaking. I stood up, buttoned my blazer, and walked around the desk toward the door. I opened it, gesturing for her to leave. I looked at the woman who had failed to be a mother in every way that mattered, and I offered her the exact same compassion she had offered me when I needed it most. "Deal with it," I said. She flinched as if I had struck her. She looked at my face, realizing that the door was closed, the lock was turned, and there was absolutely no way back inside. She lowered her head, walked out of my office, and the glass door clicked shut behind her. So, Reddit and to everyone watching, was I too harsh for cutting them off entirely and refusing to help them when they were facing ruin? Or did they get exactly the karma they deserved for leaving me to freeze in the flood? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of sweet revenge and family karma, do not forget to hit that subscribe button, like the video, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story.